shot of the
finances, revenues, expenditures, variances.
Sure. So quarterly, we actually put together a presentation that shows where we're at, revenues, expenditures, and where we're trending. Are we above budget, behind budget? And we will be probably about February. We'll have that fourth quarter 2019. I can send you our third quarter 2019 report. That's the most recent report that we have available. Would you like me to send that to you?
Sure.
Okay.
But you don't have a dashboard.
No, we don't, no.
Okay, go to the next slide real quick. When we had our special council meetings regarding the budget with Shelley, we went over the FTEs. Could you explain or maybe do the breakdown on the FTEs? I thought we had like 425 FTEs, and then the others are temporary and part-time?
Temporary, seasonal employees.
Seasonal
Yeah,
employees.
yeah, but you're correct. It's about 425 full-time employees.
All right, great. And then on the banking investments, could you just very quickly kind of detail our bonding capacity and where we are with this and what that means for the city to have this bond debt?
I don't have our bonding capacity numbers with me. I can tell you it's a very large number. I know that that Ingrid and I had done some when we're doing our TBD discussion, we had talked about what some of our bonding capacity was. It would not ever be a financially prudent idea to bond 100% of your capacity, but we are well below our bonding capacity threshold. I can get the exact number for you if you want to know what our total bonding capacity is.
I think it just might be good for the rest of council just to get a number, just so we know. I mean, I know we're very low in what we have for bonding obligation compared to what our
yes, definitely.
Just kind of a little idea of where it stands overall. That would be good.
Kevin, you don't know off the top of your head what our bonding capacity is? It 250?
I can throw some ballpark ones out.
Kevin, I'm sorry, I need you to come forward.
Oh,
sorry. So we have two different percentage levels of capacity access. The general one is 1.5% of the property tax levy. And so we have about 147 million in debt capacity there. And it's about 260 in the 2.5%. So that's typically a utility debt issue and voted. So as Jamie pointed out, very significant amounts still on the table.
Sure.
It's just the ability to pay the debt.
Right, get it covered. Thank you. And of course, these are long-term bond obligations? The debt, those are long-term bond obligations on the debt?
Are they long-term?
Yes.
Yeah, they are. They start at 20 years,
Start at 20 years.
And some bonds are amortized over 25 years. I think we've usually always refinance or refund them or pay them off before to take advantage of interest rate savings.
Okay, great. Mayor?
So I just pulled up, there was a question on what the income levels were for the discount, and it's currently at the 2019 HUD, Housing and Urban Development income levels. For one person, it's $38,750. Two people, $44,300. Three people, $49,850. Four people, $55,350, and five persons, $59,800.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Jamie, Kevin, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next item on our agenda is Director Tate with our SCIP overview.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor, Mayor, City Council. My name is Jeff Tate, Director of Community Development. And I'd like to orient Council to page 3 of your packet. And The item that's included in this evening's packet is an overview of the South King Housing and Homelessness Partners and an interlocal agreement and some of the roles and work that Auburn is involved in with respect to SCIP. That's how you'll commonly hear it referred to, as SCIP. So there's a memo that provides an overview of SCIP as well as a couple of attachments. I'm going to just sort of walk through the memo, and if we need to refer to the attachments, we can as well. The South King Housing and Homelessness Partners is a formation that's created through an interlocal agreement. The interlocal agreement is between 9 cities and King County. So the cities are Auburn, Burien, Covington, Des Moines, Federal Way, Kent, Normandy Park, Renton, and Tukwila. So those 9 cities, through the first 3 or 4 months of 2019, worked on the interlocal agreement together and brought through their respective city councils that same interlocal agreement, and ultimately each city council passed that interlocal agreement, which once the collective actions of all those city councils occurred, officially formed SCIP. So on page 3, I've included a few of the purpose statements that are pulled from the interlocal agreement. I'll just read those 4 statements. Promise not to read through the whole memo. But I think the purpose statements are important. To ensure the availability of housing that meets the needs of all income levels in South King County. The parties wish to act cooperatively to formulate affordable housing policies and strategies that address housing stability and to foster efforts to preserve and provide affordable housing. Parties have determined that the most efficient and effective way to address affordable housing needs in South King County is through cooperative action and pooling public and private resources. And then to develop a cooperative work plan with a primary focus on the production and preservation of affordable housing, which is needed because the lack of access to affordable housing is one of the key contributors to homelessness. So generally speaking, and I do want to mention that the attachment 1 to the memo is the interlocal agreement, is the version, it's resolution 5408 that was signed by City Council back in February of last year. So that provides all the details about the formation of the agreement. But generally speaking, the composition of SCIP revolves around an executive board that's established in the interlocal agreement. Each member has each city and the county have a member that is part of the executive board of SCIP, and then an alternate as well. In the chart, you'll see that Mayor Backus is the City of Auburn's representative on SCIP. She's also been appointed as chair of SCIP. Brian Wilson is the vice chair of SCIP. He's the city manager of Burien. The interlocal agreement, there's some funding information as you move through the memo, but the interlocal agreement provides a funding contribution from each of the SCIP members. And what that funding contribution does is it essentially pays for an executive manager who's just been hired, and who just started last week, Angela Sanfilippo. And the funding contribution also assumes a second SCIP staff person that she's going to initiate a hiring process for as well to support the work. In addition to the executive board and SCIP staff, there's also a SCIP staff working group. And the staff working group is really made up of staff from each of the city that help provide support and technical assistance to both the executive board and to SCIP staff. In the interlocal agreement, it indicates that one of the members needs to be appointed as the administering agency. The administering agency is the city that will be responsible for processing paychecks for SCIP staff, processing invoices, providing IT support, providing finance support, providing HR support in the hiring process. Auburn has been selected by the executive board to be the administrating agency. So as I mentioned, Angela began last week, and Angela's office is positioned here in Auburn, although it is anticipated that Angela will spend a lot of time moving from city to city and engaging within each community. On page 5 at the bottom, there is an itemized list of each municipality and what their annual financial contribution is to SCIP. Auburn's, you'll see, is $26,000. And you'll see that the contribution structure is really population-based. And there's also other contributors besides the 9 cities in the county, namely King County Housing Authority, BECU, Franciscan, a couple of other private contributions as well. And as you navigate down onto page 6, you'll see kind of a high-level overview of what SCIP expense lines look like. Also on page 6, I've outlined a few of the initial executive board actions. Of course, those include, as I mentioned, appointing a chair and a vice chair, designating Auburn as the administrating agency. Also, the executive board adopted rules of procedure, established a routine meeting schedule, which is the 4th Friday of each month from 1 to 3. It is a public meeting. They are advertised meetings. SCIP has a web page where those meetings are advertised and packets are available. So anybody is invited to come and attend and participate. The meeting location moves around, again, because it's a 9-member coalition of cities. Important to move the meetings and make the business of SCIP as accessible throughout the 9-city region. As administrating agency, there's a number of items that we've had to take care of, and I would say a relatively significant administrative lift on the part of our Human Resources Department, on the part of our Finance Department, Legal, and IT to help really get the agency organized and able to operate. Now, past the kind of the administrative work, what is the work of SCIP? What has SCIP started to do? So one of the things that the executive board did was they identified top priorities in the world of affordable housing. And those priorities are included as attachment 2 to the memo. Priorities are interesting because as the conversation it's a very similar conversation about affordable housing from one city to the next. So priorities have common themes, but within individual municipalities, there's recognition that there's autonomy and a need to do different things within different cities to support affordable housing initiatives. The executive board adopted a communications plan. The executive board has been hearing educational presentations from nonprofits and other cities about programs and things that are working in different cities that support affordable housing. And then an exciting prospect that occurred last year during the 2019 legislative session was when the state legislature enacted House Bill 1406. And this has caused a number of subsequent actions. And I want to pause on 1406 real quick because it's a really important piece of legislation. What it does is it allows a city to recapture sales tax that's being collected in Olympia and sent back to Auburn, sales tax that was not coming to Auburn previously. The legislation requires that a city take resolution action declaring its intent to invoke the HB 1406 provisions, and it also requires the city to take ordinance action to actually cause that to go into effect. The City of Auburn has taken both of those actions, so the resolution and ordinance were adopted the same evening back in September. And the effect of that is that for a 20-year period of time, the city of Auburn will collect about $150,000 a year to support affordable housing initiatives. The legislation limits what a city can do and what it can't do with respect to affordable housing, so that's probably worthy of its own conversation about what's enabled under that legislation. One of the actions that the executive board took, the SCIP executive board, was to encourage each of the SCIP member cities to invoke the provisions of HB 1406, but also to take the revenue that is collected within each city and pool it and send it to SCIP. So the City of Auburn City Council in December took an action in support through resolution to direct that $150,000 per year to SCIP. Coincidentally, the City of Burien that same evening took the same action. Since then, Des Moines has taken that action as well. But there is a provision within each adopting resolution that it's we're in this together or we're not in this together. So if the City of Auburn is sending its SCIP funds to, or its HB 1406 funds to SCIP, it's really conditioned on the fact that we should all be doing that. So no funds have actually been directed to SCIP at this point, although the city is starting to collect that sales tax revenue. The power of HB 1406 is in the cumulative nature of what the 9 cities would collect. It adds up to about $1 million a year. And the HB 1406 has a timeline of 20 years, so it's a $20 million revenue source that when the early conversations of forming SCIP were taking place, nobody at that point ever realized that there'd actually be a funding source like that. An additional action that the legislature took in 2019 was the adoption of House Bill 1923. And HB 1923 is the legislature authorizing a funding source that cities could tap into to the tune of $100,000 to initiate and carry out affordable housing objectives within its community. So the timing, the stars were sort of aligning with all of these different things happening at the same time. It was very fortuitous that a lot of this was happening in the same year. The City of Auburn applied for those 1923 funds and received the $100,000 grant award. What was powerful in our grant application was that we partnered with 5 other cities, all of which are SCIP member cities, who also applied for $100,000. All 6 cities received that $100,000 award from the State Department of Commerce. So it's a $600,000 investment that the state is making in South King County. Within the grant application, it was called out that $20,000 from each city would be directed to SCIP to fund some data and research that is important for understanding affordability and housing profiles and housing condition in South King County. So that work is underway. It's also, I think, worth pointing out on that work that the City of Kent is taking the lead. And I call that out because it really shows the partnerships that are being fostered within the South County region, where different cities are taking different types of leadership roles to address what I think a lot of folks, a lot of councils, and a lot of staff believe is a crisis issue. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from council? So, go ahead, Councilmember Stearns.
Hi, so how much housing stock will be built in Auburn with the funds from, that you just talked about?
So one of the reasons that we applied for the 1923 funds was to figure out what are the housing emphasis areas going to be. There's work that has to be done in both building housing or preserving housing, as well as policy development. So there's sort of 2 branches of the work effort. The numbers aren't known right now. We did prepare in 2019 a memo to City Council that outlined what Auburn's profile of affordable housing looked like. So that's something that would be an easy data piece to resurrect and provide the City Council to understand where we're strong and where we're weak. We are weak in Auburn for housing that serves 30% AMI, average median income for King County and less. We are strong once you get to 60% AMI, and between 30 and 60, it's, we're close. So we've identified between the 0 to 30%, the 30 to 60, the 60 to 80, and the 80 to 100, what our stock looks like, what the inventory looks like, and we also are able to identify what the need is. So those numbers I can provide to City Council to kind of understand what that profile looks like. How much is going to be built in Auburn? That remains to be seen. The funds that are collected are intended to go into capital work. So either building new housing or going out and acquiring existing housing and being able to preserve it as affordable housing. So maybe buying an apartment complex as an example. Where those projects occur, some of that's going to be based upon what the market is asking. Since we're working on housing issues in 9 different cities that are all contiguous, there's going to be different opportunities in different cities. So none of the cities have identified a number that is needed or that where the money will be directed within that city. I think that right now that's we're early in that conversation, so we don't know that yet.
Just as a point of information, our fairly newly formed King County Affordable Housing Committee, and I'm a part of that, presented late last year the number of affordable housing units that were lost in the region over the last 7 years. So we've lost over 80,000 units of affordable housing. Many of those reasons are that landlords have decided not to offer their properties to lower income, to offer to higher income levels because they can get the rent for the higher income levels. So the plan in the region is over the next 5 years is to add 40,000 units of affordable housing, which still leaves us 40,000 short just to meet the baseline level of what that is. So those are very preliminary talks right now, but it's just kind of a point of reference overall on where that's at. Jeff, do we know where the status is of the other cities in the process of ordinance and resolution adoption?
So all 9 cities have enacted resolutions and ordinances in support of invoking 1406. 3 of the 9 cities have committed to pooling the funds. There's a SCIP executive board meeting on January 24th, I believe, whatever the 4th Friday is. And that's going to be one of the topics on that agenda is all of the members reporting back to where you're at with that commitment of pooling. But it's encouraging to know that all of the cities have taken the action to actually collect the revenue.
Another question on the priority list. One of the items we looked at here is the assessment of housing stock and condition, and one of the should-do items is weatherization programs and expansion. Do we know if there will potentially be a coordinated effort with the Housing Authority in relation to weatherization programs? They actually run the largest weatherization program in the state.
So on the work plan, so are you talking about the should do number 2?
Yeah, number 2 on the should do. Yeah.
Weatherization programs and expansion? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we have to leverage our partnerships with other agencies in order to make those programs work.
Sure. Councilmember Brown?
Yes, I was just curious of the should do right below that, which I thought was interesting. Assess risk of manufactured housing. I mean, is that a thing? I mean, what's the issue with the risk of manufactured housing?
I think that, there's 2 parts to that. One is that there are communities of manufactured housing, and we need to those are important areas that serve significant affordable housing supply. And we need to understand, based on market conditions and what's happening in our region and real estate conditions, whether those communities are at risk. So I think, one, there's a more global kind of question and piece of research that we need to understand. We need to be prepared to act. If a community of 200 manufactured homes is sold or put on the market, you're going to have a lot of folks who are going to need a lot of help in how to relocate. The city of Auburn has ordinances in place that force that process to take a year. So that provides a little bit of time, but a year is going to come and go real quick when you're trying to relocate that many people. And people will need not only assistance in where they go in terms of just finding a spot, finding a home. They may own their manufactured home, but not own the space below it. They're going to need potentially financial assistance in making that move. So there's a risk assessment associated with communities, and then there's risk assessment associated with age and condition of individual units. And one of the strengths that we have in some of the communities around us is our housing home repair program, to make sure that people don't experience either a decline in living condition or homelessness because the home itself is deteriorating.
Thank you.
I mean, just quickly, as another point of reference, kind of referring back to the King County Housing Authority, there were 3 properties a few years ago in various stages a few years ago that were going to be sold by the manufactured park owners, and that put the residents at extreme risk. And these parks were all low income, and the Housing Authority went in and actually purchased the property to maintain the homes and the property, and did significant renovations in both the homes and in the infrastructure in the area as well. So that's always an option of looking at, is if there's a potential for park owners to somewhat take advantage of a more lucrative market, there may be an opportunity to go in and save those properties for the manufactured homeowners. Councilman Stearns?
That reminds me, there are some other jurisdictions where the mobile home, the homeowners have, the owner sold to a fairly large real estate, global real estate firm, and then they jack up the prices of the rent. And so some jurisdictions have passed laws that allow those mobile homeowners to form an entity and have the right of first refusal to buy their own property.
Yep. Mayor?
Just a couple of things. When Councilmember Stearns, you were asking about how many units of affordable housing could be built. I will tell you that in Auburn, we have probably had the largest increase in affordable housing units coming online of any of the cities around us. Last year before, there were about 1,000 new units between 3 different properties, some of it being senior housing, some of it being general population housing. And this year, there is work on an additional 500 out at the old Valley Drive-In site, inland development. But as Jeff was saying, there is still a significant underutilization for the 0 to 30%. It appears to be far more attractive for the 50 to 80% of AMI to be the target area. But we are significantly low in the 0 to 30%. And one other thing, Jeff is being very humble about the work that he has done on putting SCIP together in this past year. I have the easy role of chairing the committee. Jeff, when I told him that Auburn was willing to be the fiscal agent as well as the host agent, looked at me and said, okay, and went immediately into the mode of ensuring that we could keep our promise on that. And until we had an executive manager hired to do the work, has been doing all of the work for SCIP, and that includes keeping all of the board members up to date, as well as getting all of the materials ready for all of the meetings. No small task when you've already got a full plate of things that I ask him and all of our directors to do. So I just want you to be aware of the great work that's being done, and that Auburn is leading in a majority of these issues and having a voice at all of those tables to ensure that the needs of our residents are being heard and met.
Yeah, it's important. The work that's being done in the area is significant. The issue is that it takes such a long time to really put these things together. It's not instantaneous, as we know. The Affordable Housing Committee also passed a statement stating that the greatest need in the region is the 0 to 30% of your immediate income. Typically, the 0 to 30% is the highly subsidized folks, either public housing or through the Section 8 voucher program. But the public housing program is very limited you can't add new public housing as a housing authority. You have a certain number of units and that's it. And the waiting list could be 2 to 5 years or longer. And the Section 8 voucher program, in fact, the King County Housing Authority will be opening up the application process for Section 8 vouchers on February 12th this year. They open it up every 2 or 3 years for new applications. They get an average of 25,000 applications. They take those 25,000 and select 10% of that, 2,500, to put people into a lottery to pick their application out when the lottery comes up for a chance of potentially having a voucher. Doesn't mean they're going to get one. It means they're in the pool of when a voucher becomes available. So again, the waiting lists for those programs are extensive. So the focus on the 0 to 30% for all of us is very critical right now, because is the population of the greatest need of what we see across the region overall. Yes.
And when you consider that 0 to 30%, that's a minimum wage job.
Yeah, right.
When you consider if the area median income for King County is roughly, I think, 107,000 now. 30% of that is roughly $31,000. And if you divide that by the 2,080, that gives you about a $15 an hour job. And that's minimum wage. And a lot of our employers around here, small local businesses, can't afford much more than that. So you're considering, I think some people have a mindset of what that means in their eyes of what 0 to 30% AMI means and what that type of person looks like. These are minimum wage jobs, and these are people out there, hardworking people at those minimum wage jobs. Talking to the superintendent of the Auburn School District, when we do every year at the beginning of the school year, we do a new educator's breakfast. A new educator in the Auburn School District makes under $45,000 a year. Under $45,000 a year. So you're at about 40% AMI. So just keep in mind that these are very hardworking people that we're talking about, and an underutilized opportunity for housing.
And if I could throw in one more data point to respond to Councilmember Stearns' earlier question, I did pull the memo that was prepared a little over a year ago. And for the less than 30% AMI, we have about 770 available dwelling units in the community to serve that population. And we have about 3,200 folks on average that need that housing. So there's a shortfall of about close to 2,500 dwelling units in Auburn to serve that lowest income population.
Councilmember Troutman.
Chris, can you send that to all of us council members again, just to refresh our minds?
One other thing, maybe note, and this ends up probably transitioning a little bit into the next conversation item, but and it's a point that, to build on what Mayor was just indicating, average median income in the community or in King County, about that $105,000, $107,000 range. So a lot of housing programs that exist in the county or in the state focus on 60% AMI. So that means in King County, 60% AMI, you're hitting about $65 or so thousand per a year. And I have to share anecdotally that I was in a grocery store nearby in a community a few weeks ago, and I could hear a checker talking to a customer about, did you hear about that low-income housing project that is going to go up near 277th where the former drive-in is? And why are we letting more of those people into our community? So to me, that's a disturbing thing to listen to. So I kind of had to interject in the conversation, and because I was checking out and buying something. But I wanted to point out that the folks who are going to live in that community, the wage that they're earning, it doesn't connect in my mind what low income, when that person's using the term, and then $65,000 a year to be able to afford to live in an apartment complex that is under state housing finance tax credit programs to hit that 60% AMI number. So sometimes it's just the words we use and the numbers that kind of apply to all of that. But I did want to correct that. Yes, there is a multifamily project that is going there, and yes, it is targeting a wage that you'd probably need 2 checkers working at that grocery store to be working full-time to meet that income level.
Those kind of people. Yeah.
Those kind of people. So the person who was talking
People
about it.
working.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one
Councilmember
question.
Tejeda?
As for the grants, how about the other 3 cities? Have they applied for the grants?
I'm sorry, is it?
The grants that
Or-
the 6 cities have gotten.
Yes.
How about the other 3 cities?
So that particular grant required a population of 20,000 or more for the cities. So the other 3 cities within SCIP weren't eligible because they're too small to apply for it.
Okay.
So all 9 cities, I think, would have enjoyed the opportunity to apply for that money. And all the 6 cities in SCIP that could qualify because we have a large enough population were eligible and applying. But we intend to use that money to cover the whole 9-city region when we do the data collection and analysis of really the SCIP boundary, even though it's only 6 cities that are obtaining the money.
Councilmember Stearns?
Just a quick question. Is there a coordination between SCIP and the King County Regional Homelessness Authority?
There's a lot of coordination, I'll tell you that. A lot of conversations, a lot of meetings, and Deputy Mayor DeCourcy's part of a lot of that as well. There's a lot of intersection. So the answer is yes. It's at many layers, from elected work, and Mayor Backus is part of conversations on regional conversations. And there's intersection between housing and homelessness, and there's intersection between the work that the Affordable Housing Committee is working on, the regional governance structure that's moving forward in conversation, SCIP, the individual cities, Puget Sound Regional Council. There's a lot of layers. There's a lot of coordination.
The Executive Director of King County Housing Authority, my former boss, he and I both serve on the Affordable Housing Committee, so even 5 years after I retired, I meet with him on a regular basis, and we meet every other month together as members of the Affordable Housing Committee. So we're continuing our conversations regionally about all the issues that we all face on a daily basis as well. So as Jeff mentioned, we're all involved, and especially Mayor involved in this as well.
So there, since Auburn is a 2-county city, we can't forget the Pierce County side of things. Jeff and I have been attending what Executive Dan Meyer from Pierce County and Pierce County Council Member Ladenburg, as well as Tacoma Mayor Woodard, have been convening the mayors from Pierce County on affordable housing, and it looks like we'll be moving forward with an organization that will resemble SKIP in a lot of regards, called SHAPE, South Sound Housing Affordability Partners. And so there will be a lot of overlap on some of these things, but it's an important conversation to ensure that we're a part of. So there is a lot of coordination going on.
All right, Jeff, thank you, and we'll transition into item 3C, Inland Housing Development Group, with Director Gall as well.
So again, for the record, Jeff Tate, Director of Community Development.
Ingrid Gabb, Director of Public Works.
So in your packet, this item begins on page 40. And what Ingrid and I wanted to make sure that City Council has a solid basis of understanding in is the Inland Development Agreement. So Inland is the name of the organization that acquired the former drive-in property up at 277. This property has a long history with councils and mayors and staff going back almost 25 years. So we wanted to talk a little bit about not so much about the history, but where things are at. You could spend hours talking about the history. But the first thing that is important to point out is a development agreement, and just understanding what that term is. As we talk about the Inland Development Agreement pretty frequently, it comes up a lot. So a development agreement in the memo, it's outlined, pulled some language from state law, but essentially it's a contract between a city and a property owner. So, and why would a property owner or the city enter into a contract? Well, it's really because the city and the property owner stand to gain something out of negotiating about the use of a piece of property. So there's always the kind of the baseline zoning considerations and development standards that apply to property. But sometimes a developer comes in and says, I got a unique site, it's big, I want to do these things. And we say, oh, well, okay, let's start talking about that. And there's things we want out of it. And maybe those go above and beyond what our development standards and our codes allow us to ask for or demand in your typical traditional development application. So development agreements, that's a term that's outlined in state law. So it's not unique to Auburn. Lots of cities enter into all sorts of different types of development agreements with all sorts of different types of property owners. And this particular development agreement for inland and is required under state law, you go through a pretty lengthy process to get to a point where a development agreement is actually approved. And it's something that City Council approves. So staff will work with a property owner and work through, there's lots of other professionals involved in this, from engineers and attorneys and architects and folks looking at how to use a piece of property. So the inland property is subject to a development agreement. The development agreement was initially enacted by City Council in 2011, and it was updated last year in 2019 when Inland acquired the property and had some visions for that piece of property. The land is 70 acres. It is, there's a map or an aerial photograph on page 41 that identifies in a red outline where those 70 acres are, and pretty apparent, where that former drive-in site is located. So it's bound to the north by 277th, which is our city boundary, to the west by Auburn Way, and then to the south at about 45th, or a portion of 45th, and then to the east there. Often when we're talking about this particular development agreement, we talk about the north and we talk about the south. And that dividing line is 49, and it's shown on that map. And it's really approximately the center of the property going east-west. To the south of that line, inland, is actually already under construction, building 500 units of multifamily, and that's that project that I was referring to before in the grocery store. To the north of that is envisioned commercial development and also a feature called the Heart. When you go to page 42, you start getting more of a schematic idea of what the vision of that property looks like. Page 42 also outlines three general sort of phase descriptions: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So phase 1 is the 500 units. Phase 2 is the Heart, and that Heart will be a really interesting community feature that will be accessible to anybody in the community, not just the folks that live there. It's about 4 acres in size. It's a common area. There will be a performance stage there so that it can host music and theater, outdoor theater events. It'll include a location for 4 food trucks to be able to be positioned, where you have power and the ability to for a food truck to operate in a position. Some open space, landscaping, public restrooms, benches, trails, things of that nature. So a number of amenities in the Heart, which will really serve much like a park, although it will be privately owned and operated. As part of the development agreement, they have agreed, agreed is probably the wrong term, we really insisted that they coordinate with our city parks department in the programming of that space throughout each year. And then phase 3 is that commercial area, and it's envisioned that that will be a mixed-use area of, office and residential, or office and retail uses. Don't really know the tenant mix yet, but what's important is to make sure that it's in that retail office mix of uses. And then you'll see on pages 42 to 43, there's items 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And those are really public improvements of road network and utilities. And I'll defer to Ingrid if she wants to describe any of those. But those are really important infrastructure pieces for us to see completed.
Yeah, so these are very important for us. This includes the completion of I Street from 45th all the way up to 277th, completing that parallel alignment to Auburn Way North, which has a significant benefit, as well as a signal at the intersection of 277th and I Street. It also includes reconstruction and rebuilding of 49th Street connection over to Auburn Way, and another traffic signal at 49th and Auburn Way, which again addresses some of the access and needs within the area. So it is a significant amount of transportation improvements and completion of our network.
So I think the other element that's important to highlight is that throughout all of the property, there's an emphasis on pedestrian connections. And to the east of the property is the Green River Trail. To the west of the property is the Interurban Trail, neither of which abut the property, but it does help fill in an east-west linkage to those valuable trail systems. And that once you're on this property, there's a series of amenities that anybody will really get to enjoy as they're traveling through the site. So if you're biking through or walking through, it's well appointed in terms of landscaping and the benches and attractive fencing and things of that nature that with a high level of emphasis on good quality design of what that experience feels like as you're moving through, and a fair amount of open space within the site as well. As I mentioned before, the south portion is under construction. So the city issued the first phase of building permits on that south half late October, early November, somewhere around there. So groundbreaking has begun for the site, and we expect to see a lot of construction activity on that piece of property, probably over the next 3-4-ish years or so. Happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Baggett.
I know that it states in here that we're looking at about 3 years overall for the project, roughly. Have we developed any kind, or the developer developed any kind of a schedule or a timeline that breaks down the various phases of this project?
Yeah, in fact, the development agreement, and it's a dense set of materials, so the development agreement actually outlines all of that. So that was brought forward to City Council, and it's included in there. It's a
in that development agreement?
phasing outline of, and it's not even just a phasing plan of, well, from March to November, this is gonna happen, December to, April, this is gonna happen. It really hinges back on performance, which means that, we really want some of this infrastructure and these common space and open space features to be built. So we're hinging their occupancy certificates on a building on completing those phases along with. So if we issue 3 building permits for 3 of the apartment buildings, which might have 50 units inside an apartment building, we won't allow you to occupy that building until you've completed items 1 through 10 on all the infrastructure pieces. And then the next phase of building permits, the same kind of thing. So it doesn't just describe a schedule, it is very much performance-based on making sure that they're hitting all of the milestones and their marks for what the city wants out of the development agreement.
I know they're really going gangbusters out there with the construction infrastructure and what have you. And I was gratified to know that you didn't have to get out there and turn over the dirt before the end of December.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councilmember Stern?
So what was the, I'm sure this has already gone by, but what was the impact, or was there any, on like the 3rd runway mitigation area?
Yeah, so the 3rd runway mitigation area, and for anybody who doesn't know, there's a piece of property out there that's part of the 70 acres. And then adjacent to the 70 acres that the port owns. So the port is a neighbor. So when the runway mitigation occurred, the city had was granted flood storage capacity to serve this development. So this is in a floodplain, and when you develop in a floodplain, I'm really going to simplify this way more than it doesn't deserve to be this simple in the way it sounds, but if you are going to fill in the floodplain, you've got to excavate out in another area that's connected to that floodplain so you don't lose any storage capacity. There's way more involved in that because we want to respect the environment and the hydrologic connections and lots of other stuff. But the port site is inherently linked to this inland site because as they impact the floodplain, the mitigation is occurring on the port property. The port property has the capacity, and it's been mitigated over the years. That port property, there's been a series of mitigation actions on that property, but there's adequate capacity within that property to address the impacts to the floodplain outside of that property. So they are linked together.
Okay. Jeff, Ingrid, thank you very much. Now we'll move to item 3C, which is the overview of our special focus area format. Director Hinman.
Deputy Mayor, Council, Mayor, Dana Hinman, Director of Administration, and I'm really just sort of a placeholder here for you all to start your conversation, and here to answer any questions. Either myself or Kendra, our city attorney, will have any feedback for you on how you choose to design your special focus areas. We just want to direct your attention to your packets, where we have provided the table of the special focus area subject matters that are covered, the dates of the meetings, and also the council rules of procedure that you all have set for yourself in regards to the special focus area. So with that, I will wait patiently to answer any questions if there are any, as will Kendra.
I think just to kick it off, if you look on page 47 of your packet, this is where it identifies the 4 special focus areas. You'll notice that item number 3 is called Health and Human Services. On page 45, under special focus area topics, it shows community wellness. So it has been changed to community wellness. And our council rules of procedure will be adjusted accordingly as we go forward with this, and our city attorney will take care of that. So just a point of reference on that. And the other is that myself, Councilmember Brown, Baggett, and Trout Manuel, and Danny, you may want to touch on this. In times past, along with this document, we've had a matrix. And the matrix had topics on it that we would be discussing in the special focus areas at study sessions. Well, in some cases, the matrix looked like it was really thin in topics. It didn't have a whole lot of substance to it. Conversely to that, the directors of the departments actually have fairly extensive lists of items to come forward to council. And maybe you want to touch, Dana, a little bit on how that comes about. So in times past, we kind of looked at ourselves with 1 or 2 items on the matrix and went, what do we do next? But there's a lot to do.
Yeah, I mean, and we all have, in all of our departments, things that we know will be required to come in front of you each year. Some things are very time sensitive, other things are, routine things that we will do. And I know that my colleagues that have kind of run point on the different special focus areas, that's typically our first thing that we like to do is really, let's look at the year. These are the things that you're going to see in front of you throughout the year. Get those things calendared so that we can be proactive and strategic in the things that we have for you. That do require your attention and your action in order to move forward, whether it's, road projects or policies and things that we need to have addressed by the council.
So with that, I want to, back on page 47 really quickly, under item 4, the topic areas for special focus areas shows as finance and economic development. And as we're doing on the Health and Human Services, modifying that, that special focus area also now includes technology. So it's finance, technology, and economic development as well. Now, we're going to be taking action at our next council meeting to establish the chair and vice chairs of each of these special focus areas. But tonight, we just want to kind of look at interests that you may have in those special focus areas, and no action taken, but if you have a particular area that you would like to perhaps look at, we'd like to know what that is, so we have a fairly good idea of who may or may not want to at least be part of that particular special focus area out of the 4. So I'll go ahead and open it up to the floor. Councilmember Lincoln.
I'm interested in the community wellness.
Wellness. Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the community works and community development.
In the public works community development?
Yeah. I see. I meant.
That's okay, right. Councilmember Baggett.
Finance and economic development.
Councilmember Stearns.
I'm also interested in public works and community development.
Councilmember J. Raj.
Community wellness and municipal services.
Councilmember Trump
And I was interested in staying on the community wellness.
All right, well, that gives us at least a concept that we can look at, and again,
I was just reading over your shoulder.
oh,
'cause I didn't get
my,
that.
I just sloppy it in, but yes. James. The process we'll follow is the topic agenda for the city council meeting. We will actually select the chair and vice chair of those particular special focus areas at that session. So Dana, anything else you want to add to it?
No.
Kendra, anything we need to know from you?
No, thank you.
Any other questions from council on this before we move forward? Councilmember Baggett.
Does the deputy mayor have any preference?
Deputy mayor's preference would still be public works and community development, although the deputy mayor would choose not to be chair of any of those.
Make sure you were
Deputy
included.
Mayor's
Thank you so much, I appreciate that. Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, as far as the deputy mayor and planning purposes, I stated a preference, but I would be available for any one of the special focus areas.
The other is, just really quickly, some of us who were chairs and vice chairs of the previous special focus areas, we would have regular meetings with the directors, kind of outlining the task and what's coming up next. So as we get into those areas, we would like to encourage the chairs and vice chairs to definitely have meetings with the directors responsible for those particular 4 areas. And as an example, on Public Works and Community Development, it was both Director Tate and Director Gallup who met with us to review those items. It's very important to have those meetings separately from everything else to begin to identify those lists of topics, and also the directors will provide kind of a timeline of when those will be coming forward to council. And that would be the time for the chair and vice chair also to go and look at any additional topic items they would want to add. And that would relieve us, not that we can't do it, but that would relieve us from having to kind of go around the table during study sessions to add topics to the agenda items. So it gives you an opportunity to really kind of focus in and think about what we need to have from council standpoint if items are not included in the list, the exhaustive list that the directors already have. So, okay. Anything else on this one? Dana, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think with that, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break.
You'll sit at the end?
Yeah.
Watched it. It's being taped. Because I don't think my wife is watching. So I'm probably safe.
She can log out, right?
I don't care. People say that, I don't care that much. LSU
Bring some mints down here
17.
instead of candy.
10.
That's a yes?
Yeah.
Wow, somebody there.
No, I haven't.
I don't want to go all the way out there.
No. I looked it up. I haven't watched the second.
I'd
Serious?
like
I
to
should be in
respectfully
Vegas.
request this place to be turned on by the city clerk.
I'm in the wrong profession.
Is she working? I heard she worked.
Does that mean I gotta go home?
Secretary of
assistant, I mean, you're around.
You're getting close to half.
Association of Art.
I
You
think
be fired, I'm
Oh,
going
I
home.
heard she was working at the school district.
No, she was, but she quit that because it was really.
Too much.
Took so much.
it could be,
I'm not
they're using the
looking.
Pac-12
I'm not
practice.
looking.
So it has to be really bad.
Screen.
Ridiculous times that the teacher, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I got,
Be there within an hour.
I got all the paperwork coming.
No, it shouldn't.
501c3.
I like when they wear those.
Bylaws.
Yeah, those would be tough calls.
So I've got 6 people that are
One was kind of
interested.
a helmet, throw, and the other one was like a pinky.
She could probably help out with some of that.
Even Shelley Davis.
Oh, yeah.
So that's called the Labrador
Doing
property.
great.
Jeff knows the
Oh,
most
she
about
is
this.
awesome. She is so glad to be away from here. Yeah, she told me to say hi to you
The owner
too.
who's out of state.
Right to the trail.
Yep.
There's like a fence.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
What do you hear
for
from
the
Stephen?
dam line, there's like a.
They've asked the city to buy that.
Having fun?
It's all contaminated soils.
And I already have some people that are wanting to donate money.
Hey, Jeff,
Start out our
the
bank
Labrador property is
account.
contaminated with.
So that was, it's a lot of people wanting
Nightmare,
something.
yeah.
I wanna go check it out.
Them on the short straight.
Fits in a couple.
Jonathan presented the school names to the school board.
He's doing it right now.
He's doing it right now? Is he nervous?
No, he practiced. At first he was nervous, and we kept practicing, so I think he got it now.
Okay.
But yeah, he's over there right now.
Good for him. He's a brave guy.
Yeah.
And he's like, Sunni,
It just sits there.
it just sits there. I mean, right now, it keeps doing shooting.
See this before you sent out, I apologize.
It's been lean.
Yeah, I'm getting some bylaws that's in their way.
Up by the city.
Here's the
A
county.
large complex.
Because they've been active for 15 years.
I don't see it.
One in Pierce County, so
Yeah.
federal way, they've been doing it for
That piece of it just didn't go.
a long time. I can't remember how long.
See that?
Those meetings. So, and they were well established.
Well, I'm waiting for them to, Federal Way to give me a call to let me know, or send me an email to
It's an
let me know
unfortunate
when.
situation.
They meet in the morning at noon, so I can't remember when, and Shelley couldn't remember if they changed it or not, so.
The city federal way.
Federal Way. They have a really active one.
I think that's,
Blackberry bushes are gonna. What about the property to the west of that? And I noticed that there is,
That one's the,
it's undeveloped.
And you know, Shelley got her ministry, she can marry and stuff.
public notices in there.
Her ministry license, so she can marry people now.
It's private also.
She's really involved with some other people
Is the cleanup
that
of
do
the
that.
Labrador
In fact,
expensive if it's at that level?
I met one of them in
Templates, or is it something
Mexico
that's managed?
that knew Shelley. They
Is it
went
like
to
cleaning up
Mexico
Chevron
together
station
to
or
build a
something?
church or a school or something like that. So it was kind of interesting.
But,
I hear she's doing well.
Yeah, she is just really happy.
Look at all my wrappers. See, I've learned to hide them.
is it worse having?
So Larry, where'd you get your hat?
I got that for me.
When did it attach you?
haven't ordered a lot.
Husband was out of town.
It starts snowing.
Yeah, nobody would actually tell us.
Yeah.
You don't really recognize the insulating quality of hair until you don't have it.
Tell me about it.
Oh, man.
I'm not quite where you are, but I'm getting there.
Well,
right
I
up
probably could grow about as much hair as you can. But,
Jamie.
they were trying to put one
Working
at a time, so I fired them all.
I remember.
You know, I wish Ron would just shave this off, because he's got this big
Let's go ahead and get
hair.
started again, please, everybody.
Oh, why don't you just shave it off?
It's scary though the first time.
Really?
Yeah, 'cause you don't know how you're gonna look.
Call the meeting back to order. Okay, the next item on our agenda list, item number 3E, overview of Mel's Lot Development Agreement. An array of people, Doug and Kendra and Dana.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. Kendra Como, City Attorney. Dana Hinman, Director of Administration, has already spoken tonight. And then Doug Ruth, Assistant City Attorney. We are here this evening to present what is referred to as Mel's Lot and 3 different agreements for your consideration that will be under a resolution set for Council's consideration January 21st. Doug has pulled up a picture of the property we're looking at and discussing this evening. It's 1 block northwest of City Hall at A Street Northwest and First Street Northwest. And there are 3 documents for your consideration that we'll go through tonight and talk about. There's an amended development rights agreement, which Director Tate has previously spoken about what a development agreement looks like. This one has development rights for the property owner and then us as an easement holder. So the second document is a parking easement agreement. And the third document is a withdrawal of appeal and a release. So from there, I'll introduce Doug to take it over.
Yeah, thank you, Kendra. So this transaction, this real estate transaction will be for your consideration next week, as Kendra mentioned. I'm going to cover an overview that largely follows the memo that was in your packet. So if you read it in detail, I apologize. Otherwise, it's sometimes nice, though, to hear it twice. So I will be just giving a high-level overview. Most of the transactions city sees comes by way of a purchase and sale agreement, a deed, or condemnation and deed. This one's a little different because it comes to us as an amendment to a development rights agreement. So it's interesting in that aspect. It concerns, as Kendra mentioned, the lot. The map there has a giant orange box on it. In fact, it does not have a giant orange box on it. What it does have, if you guys aren't still familiar with it, it has a spoon, knife, and fork ostrich on it. Mm-hmm. So that's the lot. So it's city-owned, and just as important, it has, as Kendra mentioned, an easement on it, a parking access easement. That easement is connected to our condo units in the annex. And so when I was employed here, I heard that we had condo units. I thought, this is great, I want to live there. But those aren't the condo units. It's not residential, it's business condo units. The annex where the public works and planning and various departments are housed. The city doesn't own the whole building. We own certain condos, and the easements are the parking easement is connected to that. We have 120 spots over at the Mel's lot for the parking for that building. City parking for the employees is 39 stalls, and then 74 stalls are leased out. So then I want to talk a little bit about the history too. As Jeff mentioned, Inland had a 25-year history. The Mel's lot probably goes back that far too, but don't worry, I'm not going to go back to the time of Mel's Lumber in Tavern Row, or the time when steel ostriches were running wild around Auburn. I'm just going to go back to 2009, and that's when the Mel's lot was owned by the Auburn Professional Plaza, a development company, and they also owned the annex at that time. They still do, and that's also the year when the easement was created to satisfy the parking requirements. So just like any other building, you have to have a certain amount of parking when you create a building, and to satisfy that requirement, an easement was executed for the lots on the Mel's property. In 2010, the annex building owned by APP was condominiumized, and the stalls, the 120 stalls, were assigned to individual units. In that same year, the city took several actions. We acquired some of the condos. We had been leasing them, then we acquired them to have our offices there. And then, of course, by that same act, we acquired the easement to go with those condo units for the parking. And we also acquired the Mel's Lot. And then the development rights agreement was executed. And that, if I get sloppy and say the DRA, that's what I'm talking about, the development right agreement. So in the same year, the city then leased some of our spots to Multicare, and they used it for their valet parking. And it stayed that way for quite a while. And then in 2013, we gave some of the spots back to Auburn Professional Plaza because they acquired one of the condos. And then fast forward to 2017, when Sound Transit announces that they're going to open up a second Sounder garage, and they identify the Mel's Lot as their primary location for that garage. On the heels of that, 2017 through 2019, APP started submitting development permits, applications for the Mel's Lot. They assigned their rights to a company called Lexi LCC. So if I speak about APP and Lexi, they're connected. The rights have just been assigned to Lexi. So then in 2019, Lexi exercised its rights under the development rights agreement, but allowed it to gain ownership of the property. That brings us up to date and gets us to the heart of the matter, the real estate transaction conveying the property. So as Kendra mentioned, Jeff talked about development rights agreements. This one's a little bit different. As Jeff mentioned, a lot of development rights agreements will set out the zoning and the land regulations for that particular property. This one is a little more cut down, and it just provided the right to develop the property. So the city, when it purchased the property, assigned the exclusive development rights to Lexi, or APP at that time, to develop it in any manner they wanted to. So if they wanted to have a utensil ostrich farm there, they could put up a utensil ostrich farm there. Or office complex garage, any manner. And they had that right for 10 years. And since it was signed in March of 2010, roughly around March of 2020, they would lose the development rights. The development agreement also required any development to honor our easement on or off Mel's Lot. So we had the 120 parking easement connected to our condo units. It was actually 113, sorry, after we had some of them revert back to the Auburn Professional Plaza. So that 113 parking was protected. They could protect it was protected either by requiring the parking stalls to be on the Mel's Lot, or they could be placed on another property, a substitute property. So what was also a little different about this development rights agreement is that there was a provision for conveyance of the property at any time when APP or Lexi met 3 criteria. And those 3 criteria were obtaining development permits for the property, so actually having them be approved for whatever development they had decided upon or ready to be issued. Second, establishing a source of funds for that development. And third, providing design and access to new parking spots. So, and they could meet that third one in 2 different ways. They could meet it by a new design of parking on the property. So if they Lexi decided to make a parking garage on that parking, they could have the 113 spots on the top floor, the middle floor, wherever, but they had to have that 113 somewhere on the property. Or they could meet that third requirement by finding substitute parking. Another property altogether, put the parking onto that, and then develop the Mel's Lot. Initially, Lexi decided they would take the second option, and they submitted development applications for the Mel's Lot as well as a couple other properties to use as substitute parking. They decided to not go that route and decided to exercise it just under the first option of finding parking or keeping the parking on the Mel's Lot. Okay, as Kendra mentioned, the DRA is one key document in this real estate transaction. The other one is the parking access easement, which protects our 113 spots on the property. The access easement is being also amended as part of this process. If you read it, it's what you would expect from an access easement. provides for security, if we wanted security on the property, pedestrian vehicle access, prohibits RVs from being parked there, operating expenses are provided for. But in one way, it's kind of different than a access easement, and that is that like the development rights agreement, it provides for the easement being satisfied through substitute parking. Parking could be found on another property. So both of those agreements are going to be, or proposed to be, amended to reflect the conveyance of the property. As mentioned, Lexi is exercising option number 1. So they have proposed and received approval of their development agreement, or sorry, development applications. They have identified a source of funds, and they have shown a design of where the parking is going to be on the property. So they've met the 3 criteria under option number 1, and that gives them the right to conveyance of the property. To reflect that, the development rights agreement is being amended in many different ways. I'm not going to go line by line through them. I will just say that the changes reflect this change of ownership, but the retention of the current use as a parking lot. So the agreement will retain, after amended, the parking easement, respect for the parking easement, the fact that the city has condemnation power, so we could still condemn the property if we found a need to do that. And we will still receive value if Sound Transit decides to condemn the property. We will receive our value for the loss of that parking, either temporarily or in the long term. What has really changed is, of course, Lexi will now have ownership of the property. We have lost that. And so if Sound Transit, for instance, were to condemn the property, Lexi would receive the compensation for that ownership. The city would no longer receive that. And that's just by virtue of the development agreement signed 10 years ago. What we gain, that's not just a culmination of the process, was through negotiations we gained that the substitute parking will no longer be an option. So both in the parking easement and in the development rights agreement, we're taking away that option for the parking to be placed on the substitute pieces of property. It'll have to remain on the Mel's lot. Also part of the agreement is the withdrawal of Lexi's permits and their appeals. As Kendra mentioned, one of the agreements is a withdrawal of the permits, and that's because Lexi had sought permits for this substitute parking. They were going to do demolitions and change the lots into parking lots. That's no longer necessary, so they are withdrawing those permits. They're dropping their appeals that they had. There was a few determinations by the city on those permits that they were appealing, and they will drop those as part of the agreement as well. The 2 permits, what they are continuing, are demo permits, so they will be going forward to demoing on those 2 lots. Similarly, the parking easement amendments kind of dovetail from that. They remove the right to the substitute parking again, and the amendments move some of the provisions in the parking easement agreement to the development rights agreement. But we do gain through that change as well an ability to lease the parking to not just tenants of the condo units of the annex property, but to really anyone else. So we could choose not to just lease them to the multi-care, which is also a tenant in the annex, but we could lease them to any other body. So that's an improvement for us. So in summary, this conveyance is a culmination of a process that was set 10 years ago in the development rights agreement, and is now being triggered by Lexi, who had that right through the development agreement, by proposing a development, providing the money, and showing a design for the current parking. And through the approval, if the council so chooses, of the amendments to both agreements, the conveyance, along with the deed, of course, would be concluded. With that, I'm open for questions.
Questions from council? Councilmember Baggett.
Doug, would there be any, aside from the condemnation of the property with the Sound Transit parking structure, is there any other complications that would arise that would affect that?
Affect the condemnation of the Sound Transit? No, in this transaction, it shouldn't. Lexi will become the owner. They will be subject to condemnation just as much as the city would be if they were owner. Equally, our easement potentially is subject to the condemnation from Sound Transit. We don't know what their decision will be on that. They are in the process of performing their appraisal. They've kind of put it on hold while we finished up this process. A little hard for them to appraise without knowing what the situation is. But once we complete this process, they'll continue on with their appraisal, and they could decide to condemn in either respect.
And I'll note, just in case it's not clear, Sound Transit has communicated that they will, as a preliminary matter, they've decided to put our parking spots in the parking garage should it be built. So if our easement is condemned, we would be either paid out for it or we would go into the garage space.
Very good. Councilmember Stearns?
What, can you explain what happens with our ability to tax the property now?
Well, moving from Lexi moving to the ownership of the property, then they'll be taxed for the property tax, just like any other property owner. We won't have, obviously that's a county function, and we receive some of that property tax. But yes, they will have tax.
So just a property tax, nothing else?
Yeah.
No, not at this time.
So is that according to the appraisal? And when will they know about the appraisal?
Well, like I said, they've been putting it on hold, and I apologize, I didn't ask an estimation of how long that'll take. So I don't know. I imagine it's going to be some months. An appraisal like this will take some time, but I don't have a firm. I can find that out for you.
I will say that my conversations with Sound Transit is they're very pleased to see this moving forward, because it does give that, you know, the finality of who owns the property, and then they can, now they have all the pieces together that they need in order to do their appraisal.
A bigger picture, in speaking to Sound Transit, they did say that now it looks like the opening date will be 2024. I think they were shooting for 2023, but it looks like as these things go, it'll be delayed a little bit longer.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this topic? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we will move on to Resolution 5486. James, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. James Webb, Senior Traffic Engineer for the city. I am here this evening to talk to you about a proposed amendment to our Transportation Improvement Program. So to give a brief overview, the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, is a short-range transportation planning document. It has a 6-year horizon, and we use it to program and prioritize transportation projects. It is required by the state to be updated on an annual basis. So beyond this modification this evening, we will be coming back to you several times later on in the first half of this year. To do that annual update, it's required to be adopted by the end of June. And then, as necessary, we may or may not come to you with changes during the course of the year, depending on additional projects we need to program or changes to the funding status of projects that are already programmed in the TIP. So tonight, there are 2 projects that are proposed to be changed. One is a modification to an existing project on the TIP, and one is an addition of a new project to the TIP. The modification is to TIP project P-3, which is a preservation project. It's 2nd Street Southeast, which is the street just south of the Safeway, between Auburn Way North and A Street. We were successful in securing grant funding from the Transportation Improvement Board to help pay for the design and construction of the reconstruction of that section of roadway. It's in pretty bad shape if any of you have driven it. So the changes to the project are to just reflect that we secured the funding and to show that that funding is secured in the TIP. so we can obligate the funds with TIB and start the design phase of that project. And that's scheduled for design this year, 2020, and the construction is scheduled for next year, 2021. The second project is an addition. It's a new non-motorized project. It will be tip N-10, and that is improvements to the M Street Southeast sidewalks. Again, that is a project that we were successful in securing funding from TIB for. And that project will design and construct sidewalks along M Street Southeast from Auburn Way south on the south end up to 8th Street Southeast to the north. There are some gaps there and some substandard widths that we're going to take care of with this project. And that'll tie into existing sidewalks to the north on the west side and existing sidewalks at Auburn Way South on both sides. So again, that's a project that we got funded from TIB. Design is scheduled again for this year, 2020, with construction program for 2021. That's all I have. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Questions?
Just a comment. That's great that you're going to complete that area there, because I've had some people, you know, call me on that. When are you going to do something about that? And so we're looking at 2021?
Design this year and construction
Okay.
next year. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Moving on to resolution number 5487.
And that will be coming to you next week for formal discussion at council and or the public hearing and then hopefully adoption. Thank you.
So just to clarify, you jumped onto the next item?
I
which
did, I'm
Cecile
sorry.
is coming up for now.
Okay, I'm
James
sorry.
was finishing the last item.
Okay, now, resolution 5487. Welcome, Cecile. Nice to see that you're walking.
Thank you. Good to be back and walking. Kind of. So good evening. So for the record, my name is Cecile Malik. I'm the Senior Transportation Planner for Auburn. And I'm here to discuss the resolution number 5487, which is for the fifth amendment of a transit service partnership agreement between City of Auburn, King County Metro, and Pierce County for the Route 497. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of background. Just a moment. So get there. There we go. So Route 497 serves the Lakeland area. This is a map that you can see on the screen. So the route provides access to the Sound Transit station to residents of Lakeland Hills with several pickup stops and drive them all the way to the station to meet the trains and take them back at the end of the day. So this route started in 2009 following an agreement of partnership. So all three jurisdictions pay equal share of the route. This route has more than doubled its ridership since it started. It is now at more than 80,000 boardings per year, which means an average daily trip of 330 boardings each week. So that's more than 150 cars that are not coming to downtown every day, which is a great help. So this agreement was put in place and maintained between the three jurisdictions to decrease the impact on the streets and decrease the impact on the parking downtown.
and it's been very successful to date. So the latest agreement expires next month in February 2020, and it is partially funded by King County Metro under a program which is expiring in September 2020. So King County Metro is working on identifying a new funding source or program or some other way to fund this partnership. But in the meantime, they asked if we could adopt an amendment to extend the service agreement until September to give them time to work it out, to do some research, because it came up pretty quick. So this is an amendment to extend the service and the agreement until September 2020. And hopefully by then we'll have a new agreement to extend it for another 5 years. Each agreement has been approximately 5 years. So this is going to come to you next week for action. But just as a side note, the funding mechanism here in Auburn is already in place. So we already have the funds in the budget to fund this route next year. This year, we're already in 2020. And hopefully moving forward as well. So I'm hoping that this partnership can continue and we can keep provide this great service. Do you have any questions?
Questions? Questions? Thank you, Cecile. We'll move to resolution number 5489. Josh?
Good evening, Council, Mayor, Deputy Mayor. It's great to see some new faces, of course, the old ones as well. So we're
We have to say that. We have to say that.
Existing, is that a better term? Of course, Mayor, out tenured. I like that one. I like
Tenured or seasoned.
Careful, we know where you park your car.
Say when you're in a hole, you just stop digging.
Yeah, exactly.
So aside from digging myself holes, the real reason I'm up here, and I guess for the record, now I don't want to give you a fake name. Josh Arndt, I'm a property analyst here with the city, and I work in the Economic Development Division. So a former tenant out at the airport, Classic Helicopters, they were an existing tenant out there from June of 2016 through December of 2019. In 2019, their term expired. Getting close to the end of that term, the then current owner of the business sold it to somebody else, and the new owner is wanting to lease a small amount of space from the city out there in our administration building. They want to maintain a small presence. Classic Helicopters, by and large, did two main functions out there. Previously, they did helicopter flight training, and then they did scenic tours. The new owner is going to focus more on the tours, isn't really going to do much in the way of helicopter training, although they did want to retain the right to be able to do that in case they want to continue to or pursue that in the future. So again, the new owner is wishing to maintain a small presence out there in the airport in their administration building. So included as part of the resolution, you'll see kind of a diagram of the administration building, and the highlighted portion, which is just a small little, roughly a 10 by 11 foot office. That's going to be the space that they're going to retain for their uses. And then included in that will be a tie down on the airfield for their helicopter that they'll be doing the scenic tours for. So everything's pretty straightforward. It's going to be a basic month-to-month lease. It is going to be a gross lease. So if you're not aware, a gross lease essentially states that your rent covers everything. So we've got common areas out there that we generally will charge for. That's going to be included. Utilities, by and large, with the exception of some communication utilities, are also going to be included in the lease. The communication will be held out separately and will be the responsibility of the tenant. I guess the other thing that I would note that is not part of that gross rent would be the leasehold excise tax. So again, the city, we will collect the leasehold excise tax, and then finance will submit it to the state as they do. However they do it, I'm not fully aware of that. But that will be in addition to the rent that we collect. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So is that any questions?
Questions? Josh, they're gonna have a single tie down, so they have one helicopter?
They just got one helicopter, yes.
Is there any chance of them adding more than one helicopter to the operation?
I think it's always possible. We've got plenty of tie downs, so if the point comes where they want to expand their operations, we can easily accommodate for that in a lease, or if we need to do it separately, whatever we need to do. So.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other discussion items from council? None? Any new business? Shouldn't be for the first. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Yay. By looking at you.